Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so we are a little behind on Absolute Carnage. And you would think that we would be caught up, right? Like, you think we would have it all caught up and everything, because I really love this event. But I took a vacation all last week except for like 2 days, and one of those audios was already just kind of out there. So now we're actually getting back into the thick of things, right? Like, actually getting back into the meat and potatoes of recording. A lot of you guys are probably also wondering why I haven't done full story videos recently. I'm actually saving them towards the end of the year, and then I'm just going to kind of like do a month where I just dump a whole bunch of full story videos from what we've done so far, and just kind of go from there, right? So Absolute Carnage will probably come out in like November, and then there'll be like a few others here and there. So yes, Absolute Carnage Part 2. Okay, so what Donny Cates has basically written so far is this story where things are in dire straits, right? I mean, and here's the funny thing about Absolute Carnage is in this issue, and this really, technically it's the second issue, although it's like the fourth part more or less, it almost kind of feels like Spider-Verse meets like Carnage. I mean, we're not dealing with multiversal versions of Carnage, but it does feel like that insofar as anybody who's ever held a symbiote is basically being tracked down by Carnage and being consumed. Now, this is one of the things that I kind of wanted to toy with in the last video, and we kind of want to bring to light in this one, is that really Norman Osborn is not fully under the control of Carnage, right? And it's something that a few of you guys pointed out in the comments of the last video. For those individuals who were totally under the control of Carnage, they have that little spinning spiral thing on their face. For Norman Osborn, he doesn't have that. Now, why he doesn't have that is not explicitly given to us, right? Because looking at this off the top of our heads from what we've seen so far, those individuals who Carnage has consumed are under his control, right? But the individuals that we've seen him consume so far, at least in the first few issues, have just been those that he's basically taken a portion of himself and put it inside of them. So we don't really know, at least at the moment, at least at the time I'm making this video anyway, like, suspend your disbelief for a second. But the idea behind this is that it doesn't look like Norman Osborn is totally under the control of Carnage. And this is cool because it allows Norman Osborn to basically maintain himself, right? It allows him to kind of keep the personality that we've all kind of come to know and love over the years, the kind of rebellious guy, the guy that like, you can't tell me what to do, because what you basically have here by virtue of Cletus Kasady and Carnage is you've got two roosters in the hen house. That's essentially what's going on, and one of them's gonna have to go. That's basically what's taking place here. Now, of course, for Spider-Man and Venom fighting off against these massive numbers of Carnage forces, there's no way they can win, right? And it would be a foolish measure to try and stay. It would be stupid. I mean, there really wouldn't be any sense in it, right? They're throwing away their life for something dumb if they were to stay here. Now, remember, Spider-Man does not know all the changes that have gone on with the Venom symbiote. He doesn't know everything that's happened here. And so this is important because for Eddie Brock himself, of course, having come into contact with Null basically sort of expanded the powers of his symbiote, which in turn granted him, of course, the power of flight by use of wings. Spider-Man doesn't know all this stuff, right? So he's kind of coming into this thinking, this is Venom as I've always known him. We're standing at the top of, like, you know, Ravencroft Asylum. If we jump off, we're probably going to be dashed to pieces on the rocks. We're screwed. We're basically going to die. And it's cool because Eddie Brock basically flies them to safety. Now, this is where the Norman Osborn part begins to come in, because where you have, you know, Norman Osborn asking the question, why aren't we going after them? The response he's being given by Cletus Kasady is, well, because there's other people for us to go after. Now, this is kind of a cool thing because Norman Osborn's stance is, well, we got to take out Spider-Man and we got to take out Venom because they'll come back and they'll catch us later on. And in reality, he's not wrong. The funny thing about this is that they're actually looking at the same goal from two different perspectives, right? So like Norman Osborn is looking at this from the perspective of like what we saw with Dark Reign. Take out the heroes right off the bat, like get them out of there as fast as you can, and there'll be nobody to stand against you. Cletus Kasady, on the other hand, seems a little more subversive, right? His stance is, we won't go after them. We'll just amass our forces to such a huge amount that we don't need to worry about them, right? It's like when they come calling with whatever forces they have, it won't make a difference. It's cool in terms of how their approaches work because both of them have merit. Now, the problem with this comes when it's Venom and Spider-Man, kind of transitioning back to these characters again, when it's Venom and Spider-Man and it's what do we do next, right? Like, where do we go from here? Because they're both in pretty dire straits, right? I mean, this is basically their worst nightmare, right? In a lot of different ways. It's the worst thing they could have seen happening. The most insane character they've ever come across, bonded to one of the most powerful symbiotes in existence, probably the most powerful short of Null, the symbiote god himself, is now running amok in the city of New York and marshaling his forces. It's pretty bad. It's pretty terrible. You're talking about a crazy guy. So he's leading the show. He's running the show here. And then he's creating a whole mess of people, like a whole army of people who can avoid Spider-Man's spider sense. it's the most horrifying thing ever, because at any point Spider-Man could die and he'd be dead before he heard the sound that killed him. So it's one of these crazy scenarios. Now, for Eddie Brock himself, things are a little bit different. The cool aspect is that because of the fact, and this is really what Donny Cates seems to be going with, and it can kind of go two different directions, right? But Venom himself can kind of feel the forces of Carnage. It doesn't mean he knows he can pinpoint them exactly where they are, right? Like, he's no Molly Walker from Heroes, but it's one of these things where he can kind of feel the fact that they're out there and they're kind of making their way towards him. So it almost kind of seems to be an empathic thing. How it is that he picks up on that, again, it can kind of go a couple different ways. It can go by way of the fact that all these forces are being marshaled by a Grendel symbiote, which is kind of the precursor to the symbiote of Eddie Brock and of like the Venom symbiote and all that kind of stuff. We can kind of go that route, or we can go the route that I think is a little more interesting, is that basically Carnage is spawned directly from Venom. And so because Carnage is spawned directly from Venom, and because Carnage bonded with Cletus Kasady on the blood level, even though he's using a Grendel symbiote, it kind of seems to carry over, and it allows Eddie Brock to basically feel the offspring of Cletus Kasady in the form of all these different forces out there. So it's kind of a cool little moment here, but ultimately they end up settling on the idea that Spider-Man is essentially going to marshal the Avengers, right? Because remember, Spider-Man is an Avenger, and he has been since the New Avengers by Brian Michael Bendis. It's one of the things a lot of people tend to forget, that Spider-Man is kind of, he's out there and he does his own superhero thing, but unless you're reading an Avengers story that involves him being part of the team, it's easy to forget that he is a member of the team. The issue with the Avengers comics, as you usually see them, is that they often focus on the core Avengers rosters, right? The ones who are there day in and day out. Now again, it's kind of a cool little show by Donny Cates, because in this day and age, in the age of crossovers with Marvel, it's the one question a lot of people would ask is like, why doesn't Spider-Man get a hold of the Avengers, right? So like, he nips that right in the bud. Like, we'll call Captain America, we'll call Wolverine, those two guys specifically, because they dealt with a Grendel symbiote in the past, and they kind of know how to defeat them, or at least have a much better understanding of how to face off against them. The problem is that in the middle of all this, suddenly Eddie Brock basically gets a call from the Maker, Reed Richards from the Ultimate Universe. Now the idea here is that Reed, this version of Reed, the Maker, has kind of just been safeguarding Dylan, right? The son of Eddie Brock, albeit Dylan doesn't know. And so one of the funny things is that he, literally the Maker says, I've been combing through the FBI's database here, and like Anne Wei-Ying was not in the body in like the mass grave that was dug up, right? Like, she was, her corpse was never there. And that was a big concern of Eddie Brock, because remember, we talked about this in the last video, that Anne Wei-Ying was basically his ex-wife, more or less, right? I mean, it was one of these things where Donny Cates kind of threw it in there and said that she was pregnant with Eddie's child, and just, we never knew. But it was one of those things where basically she was the Venom symbiote for a little while, and then eventually it drove her crazy. Eddie Brock drove her crazy. A whole bunch of things drove her insane, and she jumped off a building to her death, right? Like, in between that time period, that's when Donny Cates came in and said, actually, she was pregnant with Eddie Brock's kid, and the result is that kid is here now. The issue with this is that if Anne Wei-Ying, having been a host for the Venom symbiote at one point, did not have a Codex in her body, then the question is, who has it? And what the Maker says is, she passed it off to Dylan. Now, this is a very important thing, because what this means is that a Codex can leave a person and go to someone else. In reality, this is a way out for Donny Cates, because what he could do here is, at the end of the story, he could basically say, all the codices are now inside Carnage, and where Carnage would seek to rule as the right hand of Null the symbiote and kind of bring darkness to the universe, Null would kind of be like, no, and then just kill Cletus Kasady, take everything and take all the codices to himself, and then, well, everybody would probably end up dying anyway, because he would be returned to full power. But the fact remains that a Codex can be passed from one person to the next. Now, we don't know if the Codex is a physical thing. I mean, we know it's written into a person's DNA, but as we know, when it comes to offspring, it's not like a mom gives birth to a child and then all her blood goes into the child and all her DNA goes into the child and she loses everything about herself. It's more or less just kind of copying her DNA and the father's DNA into that baby, and there's kind of a combination of both. And so this creates a really interesting scenario here, because normally you would look at that and you would say, well, the Codex just kind of copied from her into Dylan, but instead it just went into Dylan entirely. So it's kind of a cool little revelation here. I mean, there's a lot you can extrapolate from these small little things. And that's why Donny Cates is such a great writer, because you can bring these small little bits and pieces into this stuff and just kind of throw it in there. Now, from here, of course, you basically deal with Eddie Brock facing off against like all these Carnage Grendel guys who are all running up on him, and it's like as fast as they can. And so it's like a cool moment, because it's like Venom's last stand. And so it's pretty badass. I really dig this, because here's the thing. Here's the thing. All right, Donny Cates' Venom is cool because the way he writes it, I feel like Donny Cates writing Venom is about the most awesome he's been in a few decades. And I say that understanding what it is that I'm saying, right? I mean, it's basically saying like Venom hasn't really been cool since Lethal Protector by David Michelinie. And I would kind of agree with that. Right? I mean, there've been some cool moments, but Venom himself being cool, I don't think has really happened for a long time. And I'm talking about like when things like Scorpion, when Max Gargan Wolverine was Venom and stuff like that. I mean, I guess fans of Flash Thompson of Agent Venom will probably get pissed off about that. I don't really care. I never really liked Agent Venom all that much. I was never a huge fan of him. Like, I mean, he was cool and it was a cool concept, but I'm old school. Eddie Brock all the way, right? Like, I dig Eddie Brock as Venom. And so Eddie Brock as Venom hasn't really been that cool because he hasn't really been Venom for a long time. But still, the fact remains, it's one of these awesome these little moments, because what it does is it switches over to Miles Morales and to Scorpion. Right now, again, Scorpion was a previous host for a Venom symbiote, which means that he's basically got the Codex inside of him, right? I mean, you know, Matt Gargan being Venom, that came during Dark Reign, right? He was one of the Dark Avengers, or at least one of the dark guys out there, right? Like the Dark Avengers with all the villains playing good guys, essentially. And so this was a cool thing because you end up having like Miles Morales holding his own against all these guys. Now, this is an important thing to talk about here, because for those individuals who are new to Miles Morales, they would look at that and they would still see him as like the new kid on the block. And in a lot of ways he is. In comparison to like how long Venom's been active and how long Spider-Man's been active and how long Cletus Kasady has been active, he is kind of the new kid on the block, right? Even looking at like other Spider characters, right? Like Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099, looking at like Kane, looking at Ben Reilly, looking at a lot of those characters who are out there. Yeah, I mean they've been there and they've been there for a very, very long time. So really Miles is the new kid, but Miles has a lot of experience under his belt that really helps him catch up, right? The entire events of Spider-Verse, right? Fighting off against the Inheritors, Spider-Verse 2. I mean, there's all these cool moments, these cool storylines that he's been a part of where he's faced off against some pretty heavy hitters. So grabbing a lot of experience, rolling it under his belt, the entirety of Secret Wars by Jonathan Hickman, all the events that transpired in there. So he's grown up pretty fast and gain a pretty solid understanding of what he's capable of. And so again, using his shock, you know, all that kind of cool stuff, facing off against these guys, he's able to hold his own to a degree, more than you would expect, which is kind of cool for little Miles. Like, go Miles! You got it, little buddy. Like he's doing a great job. But of course, Matt Gargan tries to escape and Venom forces him back in again. The issue is that as soon as that happens, they're basically met by Carnage, who's like, okay, cool, snatch this guy up and drag him in. And I'm sorry, actually, it looks like Norman Osborn, to be honest. He doesn't really have the thing on his head. But they basically end up snatching him up, and of course they manage to impale him, but of course he ends up getting away when Miles goes to attack. And this is one of the crappy things that goes on here, because what takes place is that where this is revealed to be Cletus Kasady, and it is actually him going through and trying to capture Matt Gargan, we end up having him capture Miles Morales. And this is kind of a big moment, because we haven't really seen him capture a Spider character yet. And so that's why it really seems to feel a lot like Spider-Verse, because it kind of seems to be moving in the realm of the Inheritors. The question to ask here is, what will Miles do in relation to beefing up the power of like, you know, Carnage's forces? Like, will it kind of be spread all throughout them, or will it just beef up the power of Cletus Kasady? How's all this going to work? The other thing to bear in mind here is that there's a lot of information that Miles has, a lot of places to get to, right? Like the spider folks out there, what was the multiversal Spider-Man team? I don't remember what they were called. Nobody read it, so Marvel canceled it. But I guess I'm not alone in that regard. But nonetheless, there's a lot of cool things that could come out of this. A lot of information that could be extrapolated and could be extracted by Cletus Kasady from Miles Morales on how to defeat these various characters, on how to take all of them out. As far as I'm aware, Miles does not know that Eddie Brock has a son, Dylan. And so as far as we're aware, I mean, I know that Carnage kind of knows, but there's nothing to lead Carnage to know that Dylan is the one with the Codex, right? I mean, we don't really know that yet. I mean, I guess he's just kind of tracking him down inherently, but still, it's a cool moment, right? I mean, because what this does is it goes into the one shot of Miles Morales being taken over by Carnage. It's a cool moment. Like, the story's pretty solid. Like, I'm really digging it so far. But if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.